Hello. Welcome. Thank you for joining me. We have today the very esteemed Michael Granado, who is joining us for a conversation and a chat about everything, absolutely everything. So welcome, Michael. It's so good to see you. And thank you so much for coming on to my tiny stage in my tiny corner of the internet. It's fantastic to see you. And I really am looking forward to this. So the one major question I have, is why you're obviously a professor with philosophy. You don't have a doctorate yet, is that correct?
Yeah, so I think my technical classification would be, I'm currently writing my doctoral thesis, so PhD
Right.
candidate is,
Yes, absolutely. So why are you out here in the wild west of the internet kind of thing? Like what are you like, that would be my major question.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Um, so I think, and I've thought about this before because a lot of my colleagues, people that I've gone to school with, people that I work with, are hesitant to engage online. But for me,
Yeah.
the main reason why I got into education. So yes, I'm currently working on my PhD. I'm also an educator, and so
Mm.
as an educator, and I've been an educator for, I think this fall marks my 10 years of educating. As an educator, I see myself as a kind of public official, so to speak. Like, I assumed this, part of my assuming the role as an educator was that I want to share what I know and I want to engage with people. And especially in the US culture over the past half a decade or so, I think it's really important for people in my position to engage with as many people as possible because
Right.
misinformation, disinformation is so prevalent. So
Mm.
that's the more academic and erudite kind of rationale. But the other thing is just I just enjoy it. I like
Yeah.
talking to people such as yourself.
Yeah.
The internet provided a way for me to connect with people and talk with people who are interested in the same things I'm interested in. So yeah.
Yeah, sure.
That's
But
what
but
keeps bringing me back. Yeah.
yeah, that's what feeds your addiction, basically. Yeah, no, I get you.
Mhm.
But so what ideally would be where you end up on YouTube, like something like creation myths. I think Dr. Dan is doing that, and things like that. That's sort of what you're aiming at, to provide that educational channel for people. So are you aiming it for people that are engaged in the whole debate and philosophy, or is it more for new people that just need, or both? Is it?
Yeah, I try to hit both. I have
Mm.
some. I have posted my like lectures and stuff like that, which
Yep.
are aimed towards a high school, early college age. I mean, that's what I teach. So that's
Yep.
kind of what I'm aiming for there, a general introduction. So people that are just either, a lot of what I get are students that are prepping for exams that are viewing my channel.
Mm.
So
Yep.
that's usually kind of what I'm shooting for. And then I've also posted more, a little bit more heady relating to my personal research, what I'm working on for my PhD. But I also enjoy doing interviews. So I guess to answer your question, yeah, a little bit of both. I mean, I'm
Hmm.
doing it for selfish reasons, just because the interviews, I just like talking to the people that I interview. I think it's really interesting, and the stuff that I'm posting for my my school is really out of which is what brought me to YouTube in the first place, was really just out of necessity. Like, I needed a
Mm.
place to host my lectures, so figured I
Right.
might as
Right.
well make them public.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the sort of projects that I did at school, I had to do a YouTube presentation, and it's actually a good medium for doing that, strangely enough. I don't know why
Hmm.
they sort of insisted on YouTube, but I'm glad they did. Um, so you've actually taught a lot of different subjects. You've also taught ancient history and basic critical thinking and American and world history kind of thing. I believe you're a humanities learning expert at one point. So I presume that would include a bit of sociology and stuff like that. So why focus on philosophy? The jokes abound that if you want to make no money at all, you go philosophy, right? That's the goal of the philosopher, is to think and not eat, kind of thing, right? But why what attracts you towards philosophy? What is the motivation?
Yeah, well, you're not wrong about employment related to philosophy.
I guess it's a mean for a reason. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean your options are very limited, but anyway, what drew me to philosophy? Yeah, go ahead,
Michael. That doesn't matter, mate. It's doing what you love. I think that's the important part. And I mean, I make a joke of it, but honestly, you pursuing the things you love is not a bad thing. Sorry, I just wanted to say that I'm certainly not questioning your decision.
Well, let me build off of that, because I have this conversation with students a lot, and then I can come back to that other question. For me, it depends. So I was raised by a single mother, grew up below the poverty line. My mom made less than $20,000 a year. Do what you love, yes, but for some people, it's good to think through these things. It was very. Right. I made my life very difficult majoring in philosophy, when I could have done something that was more financially feasible, and then came back to philosophy.
Right.
So this is what I tell some of my students that are interested in pursuing history or philosophy or literature or art, like, by all means. But the advice I give somebody who's, economically disadvantaged is different from the advice I give somebody who's, middle to upper middle class, that's got solid family support and
sort of support network. Yeah. Do you regret that decision? Would you feel that you had rather done something more practical and then come back to philosophy later?
Well, I can't say that I regret it, because it ultimately did work out for me. My goal in going in majoring in philosophy and history and theology was that I wanted to teach, and I have been teaching. It was a long road, though, and I could have made it a lot easier on myself taking other routes. So I can't say that I regret it, but as with most things in life, definitely could have tweaked some things to make my student debt a lot lower, and to make my job prospects a lot more secure. But at the same time, Mark, like, I can't envision myself doing anything else. I was going to do it. I had that, and I still have that drive and that passion to want to know about these things and to study these things at a very high level. So I was going to do it, but I could have tweaked the path a little bit, so to speak.
Yeah, I think we could all say that, sort of looking from hindsight, though. There's things I could have done to make my life easier on myself, kind of thing. But if you realize that at the time, you probably would have done it, not sort of gone on to do something else and then going, gee, that was probably a dubious decision, but that's fine. And part of me thinks that it is the sort of struggles that kind of really help us with who we are and what we do, kind of thing. I think that a life easily lived is one that is unfulfilling. I sort of think there's something to be said for challenge in your life and overcoming that challenge.
For sure.
And so one thing I didn't realize, that you are also do debates as well, which I love and adore. And I didn't realize this, and I didn't even know you were on Modern Day Debate, where you basically got on there and instantly capitulated, which was interesting. Why did you take Stuart on in that one? That was which describes reality better, atheism or God, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
So what was the thinking there? Like, I'm going to take this bait and I'm instantly going to cede the debate and then just talk.
So I've heard you talk about your experience kind of getting into the debate world, and
Right. I'd love to hear yours.
mine was actually it's a very similar story. I was this was during COVID, of course, and my wife's a nurse, currently getting her degree to be a nurse practitioner, but she had taken a travel assignment, so we were basically halfway across the country. We were in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at the time. This is at like the height of COVID. Everything shut down.
Right.
She's working 4 or 5 days a week, 12-hour shifts.
Yeah.
I'm working too because I teach online, but I wanted some more social contact, and I came across modern day debate, and I'd always wanted to do a debate. And I was like, yeah, I'll do this. So I reached out, and they responded and were like, hey, can you do it like next month? And I was like, sure, why not? And they sent me the debate topic, and one of the things that I'm not figure out how to say this. I'm interested in discussion more so than I am in debate. Like, I don't really care to like engage with somebody to try to make that person look stupid or to like win. Like, I'm generally curious in what they have to say. And the question, like, what describes reality better? Atheism, strictly speaking, is a denial of a certain ontological idea, the idea of God. So as a description of reality, I don't think it has a whole lot to offer, which is why I conceded that.
Absolutely. It's useless for describing reality. It's just a position on one subject. What I'm wondering is, why didn't you just write back and say, hey, can it be naturalism versus theism? Or,
I didn't know I could do that.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. That's probably what I would have done, because it's like people going, oh, well, atheism has no morals, right? And that's like correct. I think somebody described it as atheism as a moral wasteland, and it's like, yeah, correct. It doesn't have anything to say about any kind of So you're obviously an atheist. So what do you think about the you're a philosopher, and you must be aware of the argument that goes on between sort of the philosophy of religion side and the casual side. What's your opinion on that, if it isn't too contentious for you?
No, that's okay. So it depends on. Could you maybe clarify a little bit? Like, what do you have a specific argument in mind?
The sort of colloquial use of atheism in the new atheist sphere is sort of just a lack of belief in a God, or that sort of lack of belief. But as I understand it, in a philosophical sense, that doesn't answer the proposition that's being put forward. So atheism is a belief that no God exists, kind of thing.
Right.
And I believe that's in philosophy of religion. I don't really have a problem with either. I'm kind of like, well, I don't really care. I'd much rather talk about their position and then call it whatever, call it hedgehogism for all I care. It's going to be the same position no matter what you call it. So I don't really care. But I was wondering your position on it. Like, where do you come down on it?
Yeah. Like with most things, there's a very big disconnect between what's happening in like the academy, for lack of a better word.
Academia kind of thing?
Yeah, universities, amongst professional philosophers, and then kind of what you see for the large part on YouTube. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, there has to be a level of popularization that occurs. In any subject, you see the same thing with science, right? What quantum physicists are talking about together is not going to be the same thing that the content that people make talking about quantum physics, which I don't have any problem. I mean, well, I can't say any problem with. The problem for me comes with the misrepresentations And
Mm.
I mean,
Yep.
simplification is going to happen because that's what popularizing is.
Well, it has to. That's the basis of science communication. It has to.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Same deal with philosophy. There's going to be some simplification that happens with philosophical arguments, but in general, it helps me that people are talking about these things, because the more that it kind of gets into the popular culture, into the kind of cultural zeitgeist that's happening, the more like questions students come with me about it. Like, hey, I heard this or I heard that. So ultimately, I see it as a good thing. I like these discussions and conversations that are happening. What I don't like is, well, I don't like when misrepresentation or misinformation happens on the one hand, and I also don't like a lot of the ego that comes along. I'm a naturally very empathetic person, and it bothers me to see how some of these people talk to each other on these streams. So yeah.
So I see that from sort of both sides. I see that from philosophers that basically say, well, philosophy is the be all and end all, and the answers every question under the sun. And I see that from people who are like, philosophers are just talking out of their ass, and here's science, and that's way superior. So, and that's a wide spectrum right there, right? So, where do you fall on that sort of? Do you think philosophy holds a greater place of explanation and understanding than sort of hard sciences, or do you think that philosophy is? So my position is philosophy is useful, but I kind of fall into, well, it can't actually prove anything. I have, or really, it can't show clear evidence for anything. So I kind of fall back on science, because I got to be honest with you, that's my wheelhouse. But I'd love to know your opinion of it, like where you think philosophy stands in relation to science.
That's a big question.
Absolutely, I'm here for it. Absolutely. Look, you're not going to get any small questions. I don't know where you think you are. I'll try to small down the questions.
No. It's a fantastic question, honestly. And I'll give a couple of disclaimers and qualifications in the off chance that any philosopher listens to this and wants to fist fight me afterwards. So my position is, yes, I do think philosophy has. So, well, let me give my context and background. So I'm very interested in. I study early 20th century French philosophy of science. That's the higher up in degree levels you go, the more and more focused.
Specialized, right? Yeah, that's your specialty. Yeah. Okay.
So specifically, I focus on a French philosopher named Gaston Bachelard. And I'm saying this to provide some context to the answer I'm going to give. So I tend to be a little long-winded, but that's okay. And there's this debate that happens in early 20th century France between a different philosopher named Henry Bergson, who is an extremely one of the most popular French philosophers of all time, that has for the most part kind of fallen by the wayside, and then of course someone who doesn't need much of an introduction, Albert Einstein. So Einstein and Bergson have this public debate about the status of relativity. And Bergson's response to that debate was Bergson basically took the position that philosophy provides the epistemological framework for our understanding of reality.
Right.
And this is I can't say that it's common. It's not like I've polled all living philosophers, but a lot of philosophers take the similar position that philosophy deals with like first principles, what I would call metaphysics, or that philosophy is providing justifications for things like our systems of reasoning, whether it's logic or mathematics, or that philosophy can provide critique and insight into some of the assumptions made. And in that respect, they would say that philosophy is kind of prior to science, in that it offers that it can offer explanations and provide rationale for things that science cannot, or that science is incapable of doing. The philosopher that I study, who I generally speaking tend to agree with, Bachelard says that it's actually flipped. That what has happened is that science has come to, well, think about how to put this. Science provides forms of reasoning that are sometimes contrary to, or even contradictory to, classic logic or classic philosophical reasoning. And Bachelard says that to apply the categories of philosophy to science, to say that science has to abide by these sorts of principles, is a categorical error, and that science ought to be free to employ its own forms of reasoning. I say all that to say that I don't think science is beholden to philosophy in any way, shape, or form.
And that's been the typical kind of mentality before. So you've got sort of metaphysics, and then science sort of is a subgenre of metaphysics, right, kind of thing, or derives from metaphysics. So right, he's arguing that they're both two different they're both in their own spaces, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's an even stronger argument.
Okay.
And again, one that I tend to agree with is that science shapes our reasoning. So consider things like classical logic, right? So Aristotle developed classical logic. You have certain basic logical principles, such as like the law of identity, A equals A.
Right.
Certain sciences, once we get especially into like quantum mechanics or relativity, and you ask the question, is light a particle or a wave?
Mm-hmm.
The answer to that question is it could be both.
Yeah.
Right. So the most basic principle, the foundational idea of logic, the law of identity, we have to start making some exceptions for.
But there are sciences where you sort of take, or the logic is represented. Like, for instance, I do a lot of electronics, and you have things like De Morgan's theorem, and you can represent the circuits with the logic in sort of Aristotelian logic, that A equals A is a straight circuit, not A is a, inverter kind of thing. You can reflect these in reality, and they will work, which is surprising. I didn't know there was a lot of overlap between sort of modal logic and sort of electronic logic, which is crazy cool. But it sort of says, hey, it does work because you can implement it in a real way. So, and of course, one is considered definitely a hard science. There's no doubt that sort of computer science is a science. It definitely is. So what do you think about that? So how does that factor in? Is it that we can take these logic and make a consistent result out of it? Like it's consistent. Is that something that exists underlying in the universe, or is that something that sort of like a math concept, right? Maths is 100% consistent. It's still just an abstract concept kind of thing.
Yeah, that's another big question. Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. I'm open. I'm open to either possibility. My inclination is, and this is going back to the first question you asked, I'm okay with saying that it's a part of reality, but I think we also have to be, as long as we're not rigid with that, I think we have to be flexible with it, because the fact of the matter is, historically, these ideas have radically changed over time.
Right.
Even the laws of reasoning have changed over time. So as long as we're willing to make those concessions, I could agree with that. My inclination is to say that it's just a system of thought that we've applied to these sort of things in the same way that mathematics, it's a certain language that we're speaking to describe reality. But I'm not a Platonist, so I don't think that mathematics is sort of in reality.
Right.
If that makes sense. I don't think it's a fundamental feature of reality. I think it's something that we bring to reality to help us explain what's happening.
So that's kind of idealism, isn't it? That the idea exists in some forms somewhere, right?
Yeah.
I guess that sort of leads to the question of, well, if it isn't in reality, and you've got things like relativity, which sort of says that A doesn't necessarily equal A, and it isn't a hard and fast rule, then is it just the practicality of it as why we keep using it? Is it just the fact that, like we're sitting here talking and I say, hey, this is Michael Granado. If I'm not using the law of identity, what does that even mean? It sort of does my brain in,
Right.
or so if I say Michael Granado, I could be talking about, my mouse or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So does that worry you at all? Like that if relativity breaks that and it's not a hard and fast rule, then what are we talking about here?
Yeah. It's mind-boggling, which is why it's so captivating, why it's so fascinating, and why I'll probably be like reading about this for the rest of my life. It is worrying. I would say that I think what's happening here is the same thing that's happening with the shift from Newtonian mechanics to relativity.
Right.
Like Newton's laws of motion are still applicable.
Mm-hmm.
You could still build things assuming the laws of motion.
Yep.
You could still, the classic example, you could still send a rocket to the moon using Newton's laws of
use
motion.
artillery to hit a target 100 times out of 100. It definitely works. Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. But the superstructure that it was built on is no longer valid.
Mm.
It's been displaced. A better explanation in relativity has come along. So I think that's what's happening there. In terms of everyday conversation, you and I are on this video and we're trying to reach a general consensus about some point. The law of identity still holds.
Yeah.
In everyday common conversation, the laws of logic, they're there for a reason. They're there as a guide for rationality, for navigating arguments.
Absolutely,
in general, they're good guideposts to do that. But they may not be absolute. And that's hard for some people to accept. I mean, it's hard for me to accept, but I don't think it. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think I'm having trouble with it as well. That's okay. It's very strange to wrap. Then again, it must have been strange for people to wrap their head around quantum physics when they have these, laws that they're inviolate, and we say, hey, they don't work on this level, kind of thing.
Right. And the danger there, and this goes back to a previous question you asked about the relationship between science and philosophy. The reason why this is good to talk about, I think, because there's a danger there for the philosopher or the more philosophically inclined person to dig in their heels and say, well, then this must not be right. If something violates the laws of logic, it must not be correct.
Right. Yep.
Right. Which happens more than you would think. And so that's why I take the position I take, which is to say that we should be thinking the inverse of that. We should be saying that, well, science has presented us with this new sort of reasoning where something can be both A and B at the same time. Let's see what we can make of that, how we can make sense of that.
Certain conditions, certain very specific conditions, right? And so you mentioned a disconnect between sort of philosophy and mainstream. Is this one of the things that we kind of have to educate people on? Is this one of the things that is causing a disconnect? because a lot of people will hear this stuff and go, well, I don't care. I don't care what it's got to say, kind of thing. And I've met people with very strong pushback against that. I'm not sure what, because I do enjoy philosophy. I just don't have a good argument about if they want to live their life and sort of not engage with philosophy and go outside of it. I don't have a good argument to say, hey, you need philosophy, because they can go their entire lives and not even touch it, and they don't care. And
right.
So what would be your example of why we need to have philosophy? Basically, I'm getting you to justify your job. I'm sorry, Michael. This is not where I thought I was going when I started this question. But why do we need philosophy? Why is it so necessary to have philosophy?
Yeah. No, I again, Mark, I think that's a great question. My go-to answer for this is that it's relatively, well, I don't know, y'all could be the judge of whether or not it's convincing, but philosophy it's different from other things like computer science, right? Why do we need computer science? Well, or we live in an electronic world. Like I wouldn't have my job. I wouldn't have my day-to-day. My day-to-day life would be radically different if we didn't have computer science. And so that's pretty straightforward.
We just cannot organize the world without computer science anymore. We can't do it. It's impossible. Yeah.
My argument is that the same is true of philosophy. It's just a lot more. There's a lot more. It's a lot softer, I guess. It's a much softer example. So philosophy literally relates to almost every aspect of life. Philosophy, the broadest definition of philosophy is a search for a fundamental understanding of the world around us through critical thinking and critical discussion. Everyone does that, whether they think they're doing philosophy or not. We all have beliefs about reality. If you did it, you couldn't exist in your day-to-day world.
Right. You wouldn't function. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So my question to that person that would be like, well, what's the use of philosophy is, well, don't you want to have a good understanding of reality? Like somebody might say, well, I don't care. Yeah. I can't convince you.
Yeah, but sure.
Practically speaking, philosophy deals with everything from the nature of politics, whether or not government power is justified, where governments derive their power from, to logic, everyday discussion. I mean, don't you want to be clear in your own thinking, and don't you want to be able to clearly convey your ideas to others? To metaphysics, beliefs about ontology. Does God exist? That's a big question, right? What happens after I die? Do I have a soul? I mean, that's something that everybody's going to face. Most people want to know the answer to that, right? And then probably the most concrete example is ethics. What does right or wrong action look like? I mean, on a daily basis, you probably make dozens of ethical choices. From the types of clothes that you buy, the companies that you buy them from, to the food that you eat, to the car that you drive. I mean, you can't live a day participating in modern society and not make ethical decisions. Right. So yeah, that would be my response. Philosophy saturates day-to-day life, like in everything. Now, the response to that could be, well, like you said before, I just don't care. I find that hard to believe, but it goes back to and I make reference to the Matrix, and my students nowadays have no idea what I'm talking about. But it goes back.
Oh, that's sad. You should make them watch it for homework or something. Seriously, I'm serious. That is an amazing movie. Yeah, absolutely.
I got to get more up to date on my cultural references, but it goes back to the red pill versus the blue pill. Some people are okay with ignorance. And if that's the case, yeah, philosophy's not for you.
Yeah.
That would be
No,
my
I get
response.
you. Well, it's interesting you brought up the matrix, because I was going to ask your position on simulation theory, and what you think of that, sort of so hard solipsism kind of thing. And I know there's no way around that. There's no answer that we have yet. But do you think we'll ever find an answer? Do you think that's even possible?
And this is well outside my wheelhouse, but so yeah, this was made popular by a philosopher, Nick Bostrom, but it goes back to Rene Descartes in the 16th century, maybe could be wrong about that date, who wrote a fantastic little book called Meditations on First Philosophy. He doesn't give the simulation argument, but he gives the argument from a dream, which is basically the same thing.
Sure. Yeah.
I treat it as and I give it to my students as a thought experiment because it highlights epistemology, and it highlights some basic aspects about how we know what we know, about fundamental things like physical reality. How do we know that that there's a physical reality out there? I think taking it a step further, and I don't know if Bostrom actually does this. I've only read the general article about the ancestor simulation. I don't, so I'm not going to comment on that. But people like Elon Musk, going back to like the popularizing of the idea, who say that, well, I don't even know what Elon Musk said. I know that there's this general idea that we are living in a simulation.
Yeah, he said it's more. He said it's more likely than not, kind of thing, because of the way that he calculated, the chances of there being a civilization, it being advanced enough to create a simulation, as opposed to the first one that comes along, kind of thing. I think that's how. But it's really weird, because he kind of went out there and hired scientists to try and find evidence of it. And it's kind of, will that even work? I mean, all the evidence that you're getting is from the simulation. So I don't.
Right.
It's very strange. It was a very strange period where he went out to try and prove simulation theory correct. It was kind of. I don't think it bore fruit. Just guessing, but
yeah,
he tried it.
And this goes back to your previous question in a sense, because I'm okay with treating it as like a thought experiment and as a curious way of exploring like how we can know what we know. I'm uncomfortable for philosophical reasons moving from a logical argument to a description of reality. And that's largely because I have very strong empiricist leaning. So to move from a logical argument, because Bostrom presents a logical argument for why we might be living in a simulation, to move from that to saying like this is what reality actually is, to me that's too big of a jump. It's like moving from I listened to a video recently from a Catholic philosopher who gave a logical argument for the existence of the soul. Right? To me, it's the same sort of thing that's happening there. Like we can analyze the logical argument itself might present us with some interesting angles that we can explore and kind of open up. But to jump from the argument to say that this thing exists or this thing actually is the case, that leap is too big without some sort of like empirical verification.
Well, I think I do agree, though. There's no way to conclusively demonstrate that it's not the case. I think I would rather say that, and that kind of. I suppose I just say, hey, well, I've got to presuppose my senses, and I've got to presuppose. But I guess, and I do want to talk about the sort of new wave of presups that are coming through, because in my mind, I say, well, I presuppose it, but I always have an idea that I may be wrong, which. It appears so what do you think about this new wave of presuppositionalists that sort of go, well, I can't be wrong because I presuppose this? Is that your understanding of how presupposition works? How would you implement a presupposition?
I got to be honest with you. I was in a stream recently. I can't remember. I think it was maybe with Math Pig, where there was a
Yeah.
presuppositionalist there. I'm not super familiar with the position
Okay.
or the types of arguments that they make. I mean, I know I've heard of it, but
Yeah.
I haven't actually. And unfortunately, there was too many people on the stream for me to actually like ask this person questions. But I'm not super familiar with the position. So if you could like just kind of outline it for me a little bit, yeah.
Oh, well, so they basically presuppose that God is required for any intelligibility, and therefore you must accede to that God exists because you have intelligibility, and that's basically the position wrapped up in one. It's very sort of. I think somebody sent in a question. I'll get to that after the discussion, but about sort of one of these presuppositionalist positions that sort of says, "Hey, something is required for intelligibility. I have God. What do you have?"
Yeah. And your question was kind of what do I think about that? Or what do I think
Yeah,
about? Yeah.
yeah. I'm amazed because they're the new wave coming through on sort of the debate sphere. You run into a lot of them that are sort of like, well, I presuppose God. What are you putting in its place, kind of thing? What can you ground everything with, including intelligibility, reason, rationality, anything at all you can conjure up in your mind?
Yeah. This is weird for me, I gotta be honest, because you know, I I'm coming from philosophy of science, history of science perspective, and this idea that I mean, there are certain assumptions to intelligibility, one being the, you know, assumption that there's an external world.
Sure. Yeah.
But in philosophy, these are typically labeled properly basic beliefs.
Hmm.
Like, and what a properly basic belief is a belief that doesn't need justification or doesn't need external justification. Like, I don't unless you're taking a position of extreme, like global skepticism, I
Yeah.
don't need to give you arguments, Mark, that
Right.
you are living in a physical reality.
Sort of radical skepticism. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You can take radical skepticism. I mean, you can take it, but you wouldn't be able to come to any form of knowledge. My objection to that, um, like, does science make presuppositions? Yes. It attempts to science offers no sort of proof for the external world. It operates under the assumption that there is an external world, and under operating under that assumption gives us a whole incredibly wide body of knowledge.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's what they're like, if that's what they mean by intelligibility, or if that's what they mean by assumption. I mean, there's also an assumption made about the nature of inductive reasoning that science operates on.
Right. Hume's
Um,
problem with induction.
right.
Right.
And again, you can doubt that and you can raise logical objections to it. But for me, that's like you're in the same boat as somebody saying, well, I don't know if I have hands. Okay.
Well, it's more that they sort of say that inductive problem is solved by a god, by appealing to a god. And you've got to put up your own solution to it in order to prove them wrong, which is a very strange position for me because,
Right.
um, yeah, it's kind of um, basically asserting that a god exists, but instead of sort of saying it's an assertion and a claim that they have to back up, they say it just is. That's the presupposition.
Well, if you accept probabilistic reasoning, I don't see why you would have to assume that God exists. If you accept the fact that the future will most likely resemble the past, or that if I throw the pin up, that it will most likely come down. Why do I assume that? Because I've done it 100 times. I've assumed
Sort
that
of
I do it 100 more
universalism.
times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why that is dependent upon God. I
Look,
could
it's
be
not my
missing a big
argument.
point.
It's,
Yeah,
it's,
yeah.
it's not my argument. Well, the precept will usually go, well, to rationalize that you need God, right? So in order to demonstrate that point you just demonstrated, you need God to make that intelligible. So you're using God, you're proving my God, thank you, come again kind of thing, which is a very look, I never said it was a good argument. I said this is the one they're using. But it's amazing you haven't run across any of these guys like Darth Dawkins and Veckel and all of these guys using these arguments, because they're kind of the new up and coming thing on the internet kind of thing. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I guess I may run in different circles than you do, because you're probably in academia and I'm in, the colon of the internet experiencing all of this. But what did I call it before? My corner of the internet or something, well, it's interesting. So what do you usually run into? The transcendent argument and cosmological? What do you usually find yourself up against?
Yeah. So I've had a few debates and discussions. I mean, I'm weary, and I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing. Like, I'm more than happy to talk to academics or even apologists who are more, this sounds like some sort of value judgment, and I don't intend for it to sound rude, but there are very intelligent apologists who are like really up to date on the literature and who are very like well read. Like, I'm more than happy to have conversations with those people. And that's kind of largely been who I've had conversations with. People like Gavin Ortland is an extremely bright person who's well versed in history and philosophy. And I say that because those conversations are really productive. Like, I can, and they're not presuppositionalist, apparently.
No, they're probably evidentialist, which is a lot easier to cope with, kind of. Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't, if those are the sort of people I run with. The arguments I've run into are, I get a lot of arguments from the resurrection. This is almost exclusively Christians, because that's kind of what dominates the YouTube scene. Although there are some Muslim apologists, of course. I don't think I've seen a Jewish apologist. Anyway, I get argument from the resurrection. I've kind of inserted myself into this argument that it was not really a debate, it was discussion I had recently. There's an argument that's put forward. It's kind of like commonly assumed by a lot of Christian apologists that Christianity is somehow uniquely responsible for the rise of modern science. That's a really tiny argument that I've kind of put myself into that space because I think it's a really bad argument. So I wanted to address that.
Well, it's kind of a genetic fallacy, isn't it? Is it a kind of saying, well, because sort of religious people are the origins of this thing, then the thing must be religious? It sort of is this disconnect for me. Would you feel that way? How would you counter that argument? Because I've heard it a lot.
I'm more than happy to unpack this if we want to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, sorry, I don't know what I'm doing. I've made this perfectly clear before. You knew what you were getting into, Michael. Don't. No. So this is one of the most common arguments you're hearing now. This sort of, because religion gave rise to these things, then in essence they are religious. Yes.
Yes. Well, the claim specifically, the argument that I object to specifically, is that Christianity is unique in its relationship to science, and that it is because of Christian assumptions that modern science began, which is a historical argument. So I'm history wrapped with theological and philosophical assumptions, so I'm comfortable engaging with it. This argument put forth most recently, I can't remember the gentleman's name now. He's part of the Creation Institute. Gosh, it'll come to me. I'm sorry.
Who's Creation Institute? Ken Ham. No, is he
Oh, no,
AIG?
no.
He's AIG,
Intelligent
isn't he?
Design. Yeah.
Stanford.
I can see his
Um,
face. I'm sorry.
no, that's okay. That's all right. I think I only know of Stanford in the intelligent design sphere, but he's more of a scientist than a he's a geneticist than a philosopher.
Yeah. It'll come to me in a second. I can it's gonna bug the crap out of me.
I know that
Anyway.
feeling. I know that feeling. Look, take a second. Take a second to look it up if you want. I'm more than happy to.
Yeah. Stephen Meyer.
Stephen Meyer. Yes, I have heard of him before. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and I actually have we can get into this, but I recently had a discussion about it with a couple of gentlemen who wrote a book called Of Popes and Unicorns. It was kind of a discussion about the history and what's referred to as the conflict thesis, which will take some explaining on my part. But the gist of it, I'll try to keep it really short. There was, for most of they started kind of mid 19th century with these two, they're not historians, they wrote a history. These two gentlemen, William Draper and White, who wrote a series of books arguing that the history of science and religion is a history of conflict, that religion at its origins is diametrically opposed to science, that the two have been in conflict and will be in conflict because they inherently disagree with each other.
Do you agree with that?
Absolutely not. No.
Okay.
Yeah. 20th century historical scholarship has shown that that is demonstrably false. They're inherently in conflict to each other. I mean, there's a ton of history to show why that's false. The simple explanation I always give: look back over the course of the history of philosophy and the history of science. Most of the scientists and philosophers who have ever existed, this is multicultural, take your pick, Eastern, Western, New World, whatever, have been inherently religious thinkers.
Right.
Isaac Newton, Galileo, Copernicus, to use the Western examples. Anytime science has appeared, it's appeared alongside religion. So yeah, the evidence that contradicts the conflict thesis is overwhelming. There is no inherent conflict as far as we can see. Now, what started to happen, and this was largely overturned over the past 50 years in the academy, and it's kind of not really trickled down because a lot of people still have that idea. But what's happened when apologists took up this argument is they kind of swing to the other end of the spectrum, which is what I argue, which is when they take up this argument, they say they reject kind of the middle position, which is that there is no conflict, that they've kind of existed side by side. And they take up the argument that Christianity itself specifically is uniquely responsible for the rise of modern science.
Right.
I think that's also demonstrably false. And it's not just Stephen Meyer. It's been made. I have a real short, sweet quote here from Rodney Stark, who wrote a book called For the Glory of God, who says, theological assumptions unique to Christianity explain why science was born only in Christian Europe. And my argument, of course, is that science has appeared in non-Western, non-European cultures throughout history.
Right, like the Golden Age of Islam, for instance, or I guess classical, Pythagoras and things like that. Right, that's still scientific exploration.
Right.
Do you think it's more that sort of everybody was scientific when science was everybody was religious when science was sort of in its infancy and getting started?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. There weren't atheists until like the 17th century, is the fact of the matter.
Well, there was atheists in the classical world, I guess. There was people that didn't believe
Yeah.
that the gods existed, but I guess as a sort of philosophy rather than just
Right.
an opinion, I guess. I
I mean,
guess that's true.
there were there were materialists like Stoics, famously. There's also a school of Indian materialist in like the 5th century BCE that believed that the gods were composed of material matter like us. But yeah, every time in every classic civilization, science and religion are intimately linked. Like they're basically inseparable until we get to like the 18th century, really. In the split, I think, and I had this discussion on the channel Theology Unleashed, but the split I think has less to do with philosophical reasons and more to do with specialization. The stuff that science started to specialize in and to focus on had less and less to do with religion because we're not talking about big picture anymore. We're talking about like specific concrete problems.
Right. So the metaphysics still exists, which you're sort of going, um, God is there, but then you sort of have that argument where it's God of the gaps. Then if science
Right.
explains all of these things, I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson that said if that's true, then God is an ever, or maybe it was Sagan, ever contracting region of just whatever we don't know.
Yeah, which is why I support provisional naturalism.
Provisional naturalism. Could you explain that position for me?
Yeah, yeah. So naturalism, broadly speaking, is just the idea that the way that we come to that those best sort of explanations about the world are explanations that are publicly testable slash verifiable and repeatable, as opposed to like mystical explanations or supernatural explanations. And provisional naturalism, the position that I take, that I'm kind of open to changing, only recently came across it about a year and a half ago, but it makes sense. Provisional naturalism is the idea that science throughout its history has actually tried out and tested supernatural explanations for things. So positions like, well, Newton's physics was predicated on notions of absolute space and time, which
Yep.
Newton believed were physical manifestations of God. So if you are a Newtonian, you would at the very least have to be a deist.
Right. Okay. And was that Newton's time kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Or ideas like vitalism in biology, the idea that the animating, that there's
The
this
four
like
humors
animating.
kind of thing.
Well, it's more the, it relates back to Aristotle and Galen, like Greek
Yeah.
medicine, but it's the idea that there's like this spark that motivates life, like what sets things in motion and what gives animals and human beings life is the soul, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But that it was a physical substance that pervaded the creature. Uh, and of course, with the development of modern medicine and development of modern anatomy and physiology, like such a principle wasn't found, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at various times throughout science, supernatural explanations could have even been justifiable and were put forward, but the general trend that we have seen over the course of the history of science is that these explanations consistently are rejected and or fall short. And what
Right.
tends to happen is naturalistic explanations are put forward in their stead. So provisional naturalism states that supernatural explanations, if we can think of it on a scale, have fallen less and less out of favor, which seems to suggest that that the probability that the supernatural exists is
Very
very
low. Yeah.
low,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
So I think I've sort of in the naturalism question I've sort of said, well, I'm not a naturalist because I don't exclude supernatural things, but
Right.
I don't have any reason to think they exist, and there is a lot of evidence against them. Would that be provisional naturalism?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think I would actually fall into exactly that camp. But I sort of hesitate to call myself a naturalist, because then the question comes up, well, can you demonstrate that the natural doesn't exist, the supernatural doesn't exist, which I can't do. So I'm kind of hesitant to say, well, I'm a naturalist at all, because I don't exclude natural things kind of stuff. Sorry, I don't exclude supernatural things. I just don't think they exist at all. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that position actually exists. I might have to start using that, because it's basically the same position that I take, and that's interesting.
I can send you the paper on it. It's really great.
Oh yeah, I'd really love that. Thanks, Michael. That would be awesome. So I'd love to know sort of where morally you fall down, where you fall morally. Like, do you think that morals are objective? Do you think they are? So, are you a moral realist? Are you a moral anti-realist? Where do you fall on morals?
Yeah. So to begin with, I'm not an ethicist, and ethics is not my philosophical forte. But we can get into it a little bit.
You've got to have a position on morals.
I do.
Though. Like,
I do.
Okay, right. You're just couching this awfully hard, Michael. No, I get you. Look, I've noticed from sort of talking with people like Pat and Dr. Josh, the more somebody is a specialist in the field, the more they'll say, "Hey, this isn't my area," kind of thing. So, hearing you say that gives me a lot of confidence, actually, talking to the right person. But
And the reason why I say that is because if somebody else that has, a master's or a PhD that they focused on ethics hears me talk, they're like, who is this guy? And rightly so, because
well,
I know enough to teach like basic intro to ethics, but
yeah. But I'm more asking, just as you're into philosophy, and morality is it's probably my favorite debate topic. It's so convoluted and like it is one of the most complex things you could ever discuss. It's just so, and the opinions on it vastly differ, kind of thing. It's very, very interesting to me. So this is as a person, not as a expert on the subject.
Well, it's actually a good tie-in, because there's a problem I've noticed, especially in conversations with apologists and with theists, and this is a very stereotypical philosopher's answer, but it depends on what they mean by objective.
Right.
And I ask that because, generally speaking, the assumption is that objectivity refers to something which exists outside of and or apart from either human beings or the universe. And as a naturalist, as a provisional naturalist, I don't believe in that sort of objectivity.
Right.
With respect to anything, right? With respect to mathematics, with respect to science, with respect to ethics. So, am I an objective, a moral objectivist? Well, it depends. So, if you mean that by moral objectivity that morality exists apart from humanity, that if we're talking like Platonic, that there are moral ideals which exist in the mind of God or in the realm of the forms, no.
Right.
I think morality is situated, and this is meta ethics, right? Big picture ethics. I think morality is ultimately I can't even say human, is a human endeavor. I'm open to other creatures existing that have morality.
It's kind of looking like that, isn't it? The more we kind of examine, say, chimpanzees and capuchins, I think, to exhibit. I'm not sure it would rise to a level of being morality, but they certainly exhibit social markers that we would say, hey, this is foundations for morality. But I guess by objective, I mean sort of anything outside of a mind kind of thing. So I think Dr. Graham Oppy comes down on that morality is independent from the mind. They're not just social constructs. There is something more concrete than that, if you will, that it's sort of tied to our biology, and I'm not 100% sure I'm there yet. I want you to convince me that there's sort of moral realism, that there's something that is not just a social construct.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure that there's. I'm hesitant to say when you say like just a social construct, because I'm
Right.
the tort is like,
Gotcha.
well, what's wrong with social constructs?
Yeah, absolutely. The legal system is a social construct. Yeah, no, I
right.
get you. It's incredibly important. So I suppose I should say not only a social construct. Yeah, that's
I
probably
got you.
better. No, pick me up on that. That's totally fair. I get you. I understand. Yep.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to that idea, and I can't say I'm fully on board with it either. But it does seem to me that morality stems from some basic aspects of our human condition. I'm thinking of things like, empathy here.
Yep.
Empathy has strong biological roots. I mean, that hopefully that is pretty obvious. Even in even with our human ancestors and other species that are closely related to us. And so, like, in that sense, I think that you could say that you could derive certain kind of basic moral principles from that. I'm talking very big picture here. Kind of the golden rule type thing, do unto others, right? Might have in that respect, kind of a biological and as a result, objective foundation. That's what I mean by objectivity, something that would be common to human beings across the board. But I don't think that morality is strictly reducible to empathy or strictly reducible to biological functions, because we can make moral decisions over and against our biology. So there's also this aspect of reason, right? And kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier with logic, there also seems to be certain kind of arguments that are universal in human culture that most societies, independent of each other, have come to the same conclusions on.
Yes. Yep.
Basic aspects, that are required in order for a functioning society to take place. Don't kill other people. Don't steal things from other. Basic stuff.
I don't know, but there are cultures that sort of have these exceptions, like the Aztec culture, mass sacrificing people, and that was a fully functioning sort of society with this thing that we would consider not to be moral at all, and sort of lacks that empathy.
Well, that took place. It wasn't. And I don't want to get bogged. We don't have to get bogged down in the details, but
no, that's okay. No, correct me if I'm wrong. Definitely, because I mean, I don't know how far your American history expertise goes back, but I'm more than happy to listen.
I love Indigenous history. It's like a side mini passion project of mine, largely because Indigenous civilization, especially in the Americas, it's actually Indigenous Peoples Day. So, are like it's one of the biggest like misrepresentations in history that I try to do my best to address, especially for like dealing with like ancient aliens and conspiratorial. Anyway, sorry. So Aztec sacrifice took place within the cultural context. It wasn't like indiscriminate. Well, there's very much a power hierarchy. The Aztec Empire was an empire. It did take over and oppress people in the way that we think of empires economically. It also enslaved people, physically oppressed people. And some of those people were used in those sacrifices, and mass sacrifices did take place, but that was largely taking place within the context of their religious structure and of this belief. So you could make a utilitarian argument in that regard. They believed that these sacrifices were necessary in order to maintain the earthly order, and so a sort of greater good, so to speak. But anyway, like I just don't want it to be presented as like they were just, because that's how the Spanish, the colonizers kind of twisted it, is that these people were uncivilized because they're just
Bloodthirsty.
walking
Yeah.
around lopping
Yeah.
people's heads off and ripping their hearts out type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose for on that note, I should wish you a happy Thanksgiving. I've had a couple of conversations on it today, but we'll steer away from that. It's a bit too much. Like the sort of natives were badly treated and stuff, and yeah, it's been a real eye opener. I've spoken to a couple of people that have sort of presented, because I've only heard some of the stories, and more things were told to me. It's actually pretty fascinating. Yep. But I'll steer away from that because it may be a bit too political. I did a little bit of research on you, and okay. I do want to get to you like fantasy books. Is this true?
Fantasy books?
Yes.
Where did you get that from?
I'm not at liberty to reveal my sources. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Look, I see, the reason why I bring it up is I am a massive fantasy fan. I grew up reading Lord of the Rings. My favorite author is oh god, he wrote the Mistborn. God, I keep forgetting his name. Brandon Sanderson.
Okay.
I don't know where my head went. Yeah. So is this true? Is this true that you are a massive nerd like me? I want to know. People want to know. Yeah.
The public wants to know.
We need to know, Michael.
Okay, so I'm not a big fantasy literature reader,
right?
Because I don't have a lot of time. I would love to read literature, but it's it's a conflict of interest where I'm currently at in my writing and research. I do, however, to feed into the nerd thing. I love to play D&D, and I'm a big fan of anime. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, D&D. I used to be a D&D DM for a long while. Sort of haven't played it in years and years and years. Sort of couldn't get back into it. Couldn't find a group. Just
right.
Sort of, yeah. But so you're up on the 5th edition kind of stuff.
I am. So I played in grad school. A friend of mine named Mark kind of introduced me to it. And what actually got me back into it, the school that I currently teach at gives me a lot of academic liberty. And so I teach a class. It's creative writing through D&D. So it's a high school class I teach. We all get together, we play D&D, and as we're playing through a campaign, the students are writing out their character's backstory and talking describing the battles that took place and their characters' thoughts on plot developments.
Right,
and it's an insidious way on my part to trick kids into writing.
Yep.
So
no, it
works. Yeah.
I don't know if you're ever young and playing D&D, you would spend hours doing your character's backstory and all these little points. And I think they were usually called hooks that you'd give them to the DM and go, hey, these are things that you could use. Really creative stuff, like really creative stuff going. So I fully endorse this. 100%. Last time I played was 3.5, was ages ago. So
it's a solid edition.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved that. But I don't know if I'd do it again. I kind of started to write again, a scenario kind of thing, but quickly fell out of it. I'm so rusty. But it's always going to have a special place in my heart. I think I would start sort of playing again. So what do you think is the best class? People got to know. People got to know.
So for me, it depends on what I'm in the mood for. I like to play probably my favorite character. So I had a student. We're very student-driven school as well, and so if a student has the passion for it and the kind of basis for it, I'll actually let them teach and or lead a class. I had a student teach a class on Greek mythology because that's what she wanted to go to study classics at college, and she had done a lot of research. I also have some very D&D literate students, and I get paid to play D&D, which is crazy, but I'm very thankful for the
You're
position I'm
being
at.
paid to play D&D.
Yeah.
That's amazing. No, I'm very jealous over here. But so they run campaigns. You allow them to run
Yes,
campaigns.
I let my students DM, run campaigns, and part of how I give them credit for it is they write out the scenarios and the campaign. And they also get the social, like how to navigate like conflict with players, and it's a very valuable tool educationally, I think. But the last character I go ahead.
Therapeutically as well, they're
Yeah.
starting to introduce D&D for things like social anxiety and stuff like that, where you can sort of pretend to be somebody else to get your head into the space of dealing with other people, which I think is fantastic. Sorry, go ahead, Michael. I just want to mention that. Yeah.
No, I want to come back to that, but the most fun I ever had is when I played it was a Goliath barbarian. Goliath is the tall race barbarian who believed that he was a pro wrestler, and so when my character's gimmick is that he would like try to body slam people through tables or hit people with chairs. It was more of a flavor type thing. I kind of I grew up watching in the 90s kind of the golden era of wrestling with like people like Hulk Hogan and Booker T and the Ultimate Warriors. That's kind of like the spirit I was channeling. And the role playing was really fun. But
I could imagine you doing it in that. Who's that guy that used to have those Randy Savage or whatever?
Macho Man Randy Savage.
Oh yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah.
No, but
that's awesome.
One of the things I've found, interestingly, I'm glad you brought it up, and I don't want to bore people with education talk. We can go back to philosophy anytime. But one of the things I've found that's been super interesting, the school that I work at, because it's online, tends to attract students who don't do well in a traditional environment. So we get a lot of kids with various types of social and emotional disabilities, and watching them play D&D, I'll get a kid who in a regular class that I teach, cameras off, doesn't participate in discussion. We meet one-on-one and they're very quiet, very introverted. We get into playing D&D and it's easier, especially for, I found, and this is anecdotal, this is not any sort of like research I've conducted, but especially with a lot of my students that have autism, it allows them to navigate those social situations that they normally would feel uncomfortable because it's not them, it's their character. And I've gotten like fantastic results from it. Like it's been really amazing.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm on the spectrum myself, so that's something that is really dear to me, and I really want to promote that. It's kind of like one of the things I really want my channel to do is sort of promote that, hey, you can do all of these things. You're nothing wrong with you at all.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that they have the new sort of, they know, because when I was going through school, nobody knew what it was. Nobody had any idea what it was, right? It was just this person is, sort of quiet or withdrawn or doesn't know how to interact with people. That's sort of seen as your fault kind of thing. It's all your fault. You don't know how to talk to people. So it makes me happy that the new kids coming up, we can deal with this. We can have strategies to help them find their place, and I think that's wonderful. That's really, really wonderful, Michael. Another thing, well, actually, is I've never heard somebody say, "Hey, this might be a little boring. Let's go back to philosophy," kind of thing. I'm joking, of course, because I love discussing philosophy. But well, if you want to, that I'm more than happy to. The thing that I've got written down that I never got to, that sort of ties in with education is, do you think there ever could be AI philosophers? Right? Like, could AIs do philosophy and better than humans? Do you think it needs a human sort of that sort of unknown human quality to be able to do?
Let me start off by saying what would be an extreme statement by my measures, and then I can qualify it. I don't think so.
Yeah,
I don't think so. And the reason why I don't think so
is because your job's at stake.
I
No, go ahead. Sorry.
have a lot of questions about AI, and again, not my area. But one of the basic questions that I have, I think human intelligence is, and I probably am mistaken about this, and I'm more than happy to change my mind about it. But I think that human intelligence will be categorically different from any sort of artificial intelligence that's developed because of the human condition. And what I mean by that is, unless they find a way to replicate this, a couple of things. First and foremost, we are embodied, and our body plays a fundamental role in our experience of and our view of reality.
But why can't AI be embodied like that? If
Well,
you're just talking about senses and information about the world, or do you think that the human senses are vastly different than like we would have a optical sensor or a pressure sensor kind of thing?
I don't know. This is in part has to deal with my very limited understanding of both artificial intelligence and physiology. But it's I would be curious to see if that would be possible, because not only are we embodied, but our brain, I think there's a false analogy that's often drawn between the human brain and the computer. I think it's a false analogy, because our brain is a biological organism, and we got all these chemicals and stuff flowing through, and the neurons firing. I don't know if that's able to be replicated. Could be. I don't know. And so, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that so a lot of the times we talk about the singularity, and that's when an AI will become intelligent enough. I've spoken about this on length because I find it fascinating. An AI will become intelligent enough to design another AI. And then that AI will design another AI that's even more intelligent, and so on and so forth. And at that point, we've got no idea where it's going to go, because they can design it a better AI in a matter of nanoseconds or whatever. So the exponential growth is insane. If logic is sort of the baseline for philosophy, and that can be applied to things like electronic circuits, I don't see a reason why an AI can't use those sort of baseline assumptions to do philosophy. I can't see it.
Right.
Is there something intangible about the human mind, or not intangible, but unique about the human mind that allows it to? I think I remember reading a book about neuroplasticity, how the brain can sometimes explode in unexpected directions, kind of thing, that it sort of molds to fit gaps as part of problem solving, but it can also explode into a solution that is completely outside the box. I can't remember the woman who wrote it, but it was fascinating on neuroplasticity and how we think about things.
Right.
Whether an AI could do that is such an unknown question. I kind of lean towards maybe it could. But who knows? I think it's fascinating though. The thumbnail for this was actually generated by one of those AI generators. I put in Michael Granado, and it plugged out this anime picture. I was like, yeah, okay, cool. Yeah.
So no, I tend to agree with that. So I would say that, and you asked whether or not it would be able to do philosophy. Logic for sure.
Absolutely.
Because logic has very strict, concrete rules, which I think would be, and again, I know nothing about computers, but which would seemingly be easily programmable. Just like teaching AI how to play chess. We've already done that, and the reason why we've been able to do it is because chess has, there's very specific rules about what can and can't be done. The issue is that there
Yeah,
are.
that's kind of wrong, actually. The reason why I've
Okay.
been able to do it, because neural networks have sort of progressed beyond just teaching the rules. So there was a Dota 2 championship where they basically got an AI from, I think it was Deep Blue, the Google AI, and it beat these world-class players again and again. The Go championship, which is a lot more complex than chess, as the world champion of South Korea was defeated by an AI kind of thing. It's more, it plays these iterations millions of times, in a matter of seconds kind of thing. So given what they don't do now is give it rules on how to behave. What they'll do is weight the objectives, and when it hits one of those, it will say, hey, I've got to strengthen that pathway, which is a lot like the way a brain works, kind of. I mean, it's not the same, but basically when it hits something, we strengthen that neural pathway, and that's essentially kind of what we're replicating.
That makes sense. Well, yeah, I could see that with teaching an AI logic, deductive logic especially, but also inductive logic. I could see that working as well. My biggest issues would be, I don't know if we would be able. So like a lot of philosophy deals with subjects like death.
Right.
Would an AI even be able to? Would that even compute?
Maybe. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, it would be so far out of its experience. I mean, how could it? I mean, we don't even understand death, and we go through it as a sort of not on an individual basis, but we at least see it happening. Yeah, that's a very good point. Well, you do have these subjects like the supernatural that you couldn't explain to an AI. There's no real way to. Yeah, I think that's a good point. There are concepts that would be they're kind of intuitive to humans, but would be alien to a programmed AI. How would you even do that?
Or along the same lines, I mean, since we brought up AI and art, I mean, there's an entire branch of philosophy called aesthetics that deals with the critique and understanding of what art is, or the function of art, or the purpose of art, or what art means. That would also be, I can't wrap my head around that. Not to say that it couldn't happen, but again, like our experience of art is very embodied through the human senses and interpreted through all of those senses. So unless we can teach an AI how to sense,
I don't see why we can't teach an AI to sense. If all you're talking about for senses is just input, we have presumably an AI would be able to, or something using sensors that, for instance, it could see better than a human because it can access infrared and ultraviolet spectrums that we cannot. It would be able to sort of use touch to a way better degree using the sensors that we currently have. I don't see why not, and what that would. Is it because maybe we see our senses as part of us? They're intrinsically linked to who we are. Is that sort of what you're trying to get at?
That and the connections to a emotion, which I'm also unsure about.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So that sort of, when you touch something that brings up, or better yet is, Chris Maldi talks about it all the time, what smells do to you. So you smell a certain lilac or something, and you instantly have the recollection of, that time you went to the field with your wife and had an amazing day, and that sort of, has a myriad of effects through your body. So I think you're onto something there. Is that something we could replicate? I have no idea, but it's interesting. It'd be interesting to try. That's really interesting.
And part of another thing is, I bring up all of that because usually when we talk about intelligence, we have a very limited understanding of what we mean by that.
Right.
So when we think of human intelligence, we think of like, well, would an AI be able to build a rocket? Well, yeah, probably.
Yeah, sure.
Like
Absolutely. Yeah.
any sort of like engineering task seems relatively straightforward to, I mean, again, I don't know nothing about programming or computers, but you know, there's what we also don't factor in are things like emotional or social intelligence. So what exactly are we talking about when we say, could an AI have human level intelligence? Because that's what comes to my mind is like, would an AI be able to empathize with a kid who just broke up with his girlfriend? Or
Right. Yeah.
would an AI, part of the intuitive appeal of a lot of philosophy is not just the rationality, so to speak, but I think of like existentialism. What
Mm.
makes existentialism so popular and poignant is the fact that it brings up these like basic fears, like, oh shit, I'm gonna die.
Right.
Like, and philosophically, what do I make about that? So yeah,
Yeah.
that's and I don't
Where
know.
where what happened to me after I die? What's the
Yeah.
point of me? What does not existing even mean anymore?
Right.
Yeah, that's kind of fascinating. Um, I was going to go for about an hour and a half. I might just because I do have one more really difficult question for you. You mentioned sort of having fist fights with professors and kind of thing. I want to know how many times does this happen, and because I know you're into MMA, how many of you won?
No, it was just a figure of speech.
Yeah,
Yeah, I like to exaggerate my language, especially when talking to my kids, my students, high
yeah,
school students. I call kids, not to disrespect them, but because I'm very it's an endearing term. But yeah, you would be surprised at how heated these conversations might get at
I
a
probably
philosophy
wouldn't, but
conference.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I've never, I would never do such a thing. I'm very much opposed to violence unless it's consensual.
Hmm. Yeah. No, no, I get you, but you are into MMA and stuff. I saw on your sort of Twitter. I think you did a couple of sort of
Mm.
photos of you. Is it jujitsu or MMA or what? What are
I've
you
done
into?
both.
Yeah.
I when I was a lot younger, I boxed for about 5 years,
Hmm.
training. Um, done Taekwondo, Krav Maga. I'm now into Brazilian. I'm a blue belt in Gracie Brazilian Jiu Jitsu.
Yep. Okay, that's
Been,
fantastic. I must
yeah.
admit, I haven't done much. I did a little bit of kickboxing, a little bit of karate.
Mm.
My favorite martial art of all time was actually capoeira because it was just
Mm.
so beautiful,
It's intense.
useless in self defense, fantastic cardio, but really absolutely useless.
Mm.
It's one of those ones that you have to like for the art, not the practicality of it, kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
but really lovely. So here's a question for you: what philosophy do you think most resembles jujitsu?
Mm.
What school of philosophy? Like, what would you say
Yeah.
that, because there's an interchange between people, right? There's a
Mm.
every martial art speaks of, I guess, a style, a method.
Yeah.
And so, how do you think that equates to, or is your thing that you do martial arts, so you just don't think about philosophy anymore? That's something that, is it
No,
like
I mean,
Taoism or something where your mind just goes blank and you don't have to think about it anymore?
well, no, I mean, well, that is part of the reason why I do that. Why I'm so drawn to martial arts is because of my personal past. Um, I have a problem with disassociation,
Hmm.
um, and martial arts really talking about embodiment really
Right.
makes me feel present.
So
I
is it
mean,
that mindfulness kind of thing?
mindfulness,
Like,
yeah,
yeah,
because you have no choice but to feel present when somebody's choking you unconscious, right? You're like,
sure, yeah,
oh,
yeah,
but um, I mean, a lot of Eastern martial arts are, I mean, Eastern martial arts, a lot of Eastern philosophy is more applicable here. You brought up Taoism simply because I'm going to make a sweeping claim that, again, I won't qualify it because I know y'all are sick of hearing that. But Eastern philosophy has tended to be more conscious of the human body than Western philosophy has.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because Eastern philosophy kind of out the gate was more so interested in the mental process that's happening up here than Western philosophy. People like Plato, the emphasis is on the external, the realm of the forms, whereas especially in philosophies like Buddhism and Taoism, it's very much so inward focused. And Taoism especially was more holistic. Part of Taoist philosophy was not just making sure that we can understand nature, but also that we appreciate nature, and like things like health was a part of the. Oops, sorry, almost knocked over my desk.
Right.
Was a part of the Eastern tradition in a way that we don't see in the West until like more recently. So for sure, some connections there, but at the core of what draws me to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specifically, I like it, one, because I don't like to hurt people. And that was always an issue for me with boxing, because boxing's, you just punching somebody in the face. And there's no way to get around it. But with jiu-jitsu, because it's grappling, it's referred to as the gentle art. It's very rough. I'm actually extremely sore right now. I can barely move because I did it yesterday. But you can subdue the person without striking,
doing a lot of damage,
and potentially you can restrain the person without doing a lot of damage. That's the biggest thing that drew me to it. And for longevity's sake, head trauma is not great for you long term. More philosophically, I think of, and maybe it's because I have more empiricist leanings, but jiu-jitsu is very empiricist in its approach. So you have a lot of martial art that has a lot of theory. Well, if this person does this, I can do this, or theoretically I can do this if I was in that situation. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Gracie Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specifically, they develop their system through testing it out, right? What is the best approach to fighting someone if I'm a, Helio Gracie's like 140 pounds. If I'm fighting a 250-pound Kung Fu expert, what would be the best approach to that situation? Well, they tried it out. So there's this phrase that Pedro Sauer uses, who's one of the founders of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that the mat is where we train, that the mat is the laboratory that you're testing out ideas in, right? So I do this. Oh, that doesn't work. So let me try this. Oh, this tends to be working. Let me push further along this route of grappling. So
where do I go from here, kind of thing? Like I've found myself now in this situation. So
right. Yeah. So there's a very empiricist leaning there where I'm going to test out this avenue of thought or this idea against reality to see if it corresponds. And if it doesn't, well, let me change my approach to go this other way.
So it's all about sort of experimentation kind of thing, like practical experimentation.
Right.
That's amazing. That's awesome. I might wrap it up there. So good to hear from you, but I do have some questions for the audience. If you've got just a little bit more time, we can just
go through them. I'm off today, so yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, no problem at all. I just don't want to take up too much. Look, I've passed the 2-hour mark with people, and it's like I've got to put a limit on these somewhere. But I really appreciate your time. I really do.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So Dave H writes, question may not be relevant, but how do you guys stand with how science is taught in schools and colleges? Should science be promoted more?
It's for both of us, so you can start us off, Mark.
Well, see, science has a sort of, I'm not I'm not opposed to science having the front row as opposed to the arts and things like that. As soon as COVID hit our country, the arts was kind of thrown to the back burner, and science was like all there was, kind of thing. And as far as practicality goes, I kind of agree with that, because science is the ones to give us the nurses, to give us the vaccines, to give us all of these things. However, I don't believe in throwing out the arts altogether. There's this sort of cultural understanding of who we are and where we came from and where we're going, and how it's taught. I don't have a problem with how science is taught. I think that more emphasis could be placed upon science communication, because a lot of the time you'll have people who are incredibly intelligent and amazing at what they do, and they can't seem to communicate what they know to the public. And I think that's a problem. But that's probably my only major gripe with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to the first part of the question about the kind of status and the role of science, I'm in the United States specifically, so kind of culturally, some cultural context here is that there's this sort of undercurrent, and it's been in the United States for a really long time. I won't get bogged down in the history of it, but there's this undercurrent of anti-intellectualism. And so and this affects our day-to-day life in very real ways, and ideas about public policy. You brought up like public health concerns with vaccines, ideas regarding climate change. There's a lot of public pushback against that. And so, yes, science education, I think, for sure, we need more of it, especially in that regard, especially in the sciences that, and not to distinguish sciences from each other, but especially in the sciences that relate to things like health and our future here on this planet. As far as how we approach science education, again, I love to talk about this sort of thing, but the STEM teacher that helped to start the school, that developed the STEM curriculum along with me while I was developing the humanities curriculum, takes a similar approach to her education. And she teaches things like chemistry through cooking, or physics. They play, there's a couple of video games that they utilize and that she helps to use to teach the physics equations.
Okay.
There's a game where you like develop and build a rocket. So she teaches like
Kerbal Space Program.
Yes.
Yeah.
So she uses that to teach physics. They do like stuff in Minecraft. So I'm all about innovation and education. Our current education model is based off of the factory system. It's like 150 years old, where you get a bunch of kids in a classroom and you're supposed to listen to the person at the front of the class. I think that's a terrible model, especially for younger people. So yeah, I'm all about reforming an education and seeing, like, trying out different techniques and all that to see the best, what helps it stick the most. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. No, I get you. That's Kerbal Space Program. Amazing game too. So John Rapp, and I'm going to blame you for this, John. Is Michael familiar with the great philosopher? Asked the question, what is it that is ultimate, absolute, and unconditionally non-dependent that provides for all dependent states?
What?
This is okay. So the background on this is, and I recognize this in an instant. It's Darth Dawkins, right? He's the great philosopher.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Aristotle. Okay.
No, I know that's why I did the quote. Maybe you didn't see me quoting. John, you should be ashamed of yourself, mate. Is Michael familiar with the great philosopher? Asked the questions, what is it that is ultimate, absolute, and unconditionally non-dependent that provides for all dependent states?
Yeah, I can't think of something that's non-dependent.
Yeah, we'll see. What he'd say is, you don't have an answer then, and I've got God, so you lose, basically. So,
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably the most famous of the really sort of nasty and sort of horrible precepts that are out there. I don't know if you've heard of Darth Dawkins. He is, it's sort of one of those questions that you're not supposed to be able to answer with anything but God. That will be
Mm.
the answer you're going to give. Even if I have to ask you 10 million times, that's going to be the answer you will give. So thanks for that, John. No, honestly, John, that's great, mate. That really is. No, I get you. If you have to sort of hold up a precept as that is the new wave of things, that
Mm.
guy would probably be it. No, don't be sorry, John. It's fine. I'm only joking, mate. It's all good. John Rapp again says, on a serious note, what do you guys think of the Van Til and Baunsen types of presuppositionalists?
Mm. Yeah, you take it away, Mark. Again, I'm not super familiar with precepts.
Yeah, well, these were sort of the precursors to what we have coming up now, and Saiten Broggenkate's another one in that sort of vein, I think. I mean, I'm not a philosopher, and I only dabble in philosophy at best. I kind of, this idea that you can presuppose something and then it's automatically true as long as you believe 100% it's true. It's kind of weird to me. If I make a presupposition to say, hey, I presuppose my senses are correct for a given level of accuracy, kind of thing, I always have at the back of my mind, well, that presupposition could be wrong, but that's what they're not doing. They're kind of going, well, I presuppose it, so it has to be true. It's a very strange thing to do by my evaluation. I sort of see it as just because you presuppose something doesn't automatically mean that it's true.
It's very,
However,
yeah, sorry.
no, go ahead. I'm just sort of giving my opinion. I'm certainly not an expert in any kind of presuppositionalism at all.
Me either. And I mean, from what little bit I've heard and from what you've said here, it's a very stringent black and white way of thinking.
Oh, sure,
which,
yeah.
Which is kind of foreign to philosophy.
Right.
So, again, I mean, unless you're going the route of like radical skepticism, like what's wrong with assuming something and then moving forward? Like, why can't what's wrong with probabilistic thinking? I can't wrap my head around that. Like, if we want to get anywhere with our claims.
Yeah. Well, I don't mind two people agreeing on something. Like, if you want to agree that God is you want to make that presupposition, the other person agrees, God, go for it. It's when one person doesn't agree with that presupposition that, is the problem. It's kind of like, if you don't agree on axioms, what's the point of arguing about the axioms? I guess,
Right.
I don't know. It's very strange. I think
that is weird.
Yeah, so I don't think Michael has an opinion on these guys because they don't enter his world at all, which is strange because it's sort of you encounter so much of it. You go, well, there's got to be some out in the world of academia, but apparently there just isn't.
I'm not aware of any. I mean, are there even any mainstream apologists who take that route?
It depends on what you mean by mainstream.
Okay.
Is Saiten Broggenkate mainstream? Got their adherents, but not mainstream like, say, William Lane Craig or something like that. Like, they're certainly not. They kind of edge around the fringes. I wouldn't say really mainstream. It's just, it seems to be popular in the sort of the areas of the internet where you sort of, they make a lot of noise, I guess, on the internet.
And that should give people some red flags. It's not to commit like a bandwagon fallacy or anything, but there's a reason why certain ideas are not commonly accepted amongst academics. If they're not commonly accepted among academics, it's not because the academics have some sort of conspiracy theory against these ideas. It's usually because there's something fundamentally wrong with the idea.
Yeah. I've heard that one on evolution as well, kind of thing.
Yeah,
conspiracy theory about evolution. It's like, well, not really, no. So the Afro-atheist, it's wonderful to see you. The Afro-atheist is one of the nicest people I've met. She's amazing. Are you saying non-philosophical conversations about God aren't productive? I think this
Well,
was in reference to you saying you need philosophy to discuss anything kind of thing.
yeah. Well, I would say that any conversation about God is inherently philosophical unless you're just talking about God from your own personal experience, which may have its place. But if the intent is for, let's say, Mark and I to engage in a conversation where we're both attempting to relate to the other, convey some sort of information, that personal experience is only going to get you so far before you start needing philosophy.
So do you think it's
Yeah.
a case that people, when they hear philosophy, they think sort of this academic sort of,
For sure.
you know, you have to use certain terms and adhere to certain definitions, and if you
Yeah.
say contingent, it means X. It
Right.
sounds like, and do correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're saying any discussion of God or the reason for being, or any kind of discussion around why we exist or how did we get here is a philosophical discussion. And
I
it
think
may be
inherently, yeah.
right. So that's what it sounds like to me.
Mm-hmm. And that's the fault of academic philosophers. Like that's
Right.
the situation that we've created for ourselves, that we made philosophy so closed off. If you look throughout history, philosophy is meant for everybody. And philosophy is supposed to be everywhere. In the ancient world, especially, philosophy, if you look at like Stoics and Epicureans, like this is like a way of life. It's not just a book that you read for your class. Like it's something that you actively participate in. That's my view of philosophy. Like I think it should be as widely practiced and dispersed as possible. So yeah.
So you want to get philosophy back to the streets kind of thing and out. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess you're sort of paralleling it towards sort of ancient Greeks, where they had the forum and people just rocked up and, you know, said all this stuff.
Right.
So I think the Afro-atheist, I think that what Michael is saying, that you know, even if you just talk as normal human beings using normal human language, that's still philosophy, but it's not couched in the academic philosophical terms.
The jargon.
The jargon, right, absolutely. And do correct me if I'm getting you wrong, Michael. Absolutely.
No, that's exactly my position. Nor does it have to be couched in those terms. We could just use simple everyday language.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I get what you're saying. And I think there is that misunderstanding out there, that when you say, hey, to delve into a bit of philosophy, and people go, eek, you know, and it's like, well, we can just have a conversation about why you think there is a God or there's not a God, or why we're here, or, you know, what we're doing, where we're going. And I love that because, of course, like I said, I just dabble slightly. So I like that I can talk about things and say, hey, we're talking about philosophy, even though it's just, No, I love it, Michael. I think that's really good, mate. That's fantastic. John Rapp comes back at me. Why do you people insist on putting your fantasy books in my sci-fi section of the bookstore? Do you agree with this, Michael? Do you agree with this heresy?
It's all fantasy. Different types of fantasy. Well, okay, I don't want to trot on your Lord of the Rings.
Look, because if you're making that statement, you could say all fiction is fantasy, right? Because it doesn't actually happen. I get what John Rapp's saying, right? No, look, fantasy can be anywhere it likes. You just take it, John Rapp. No, I'm joking. Look, in a perfect world, would have two different sections. I don't know why you're going to a bookstore anymore. They're kind of being weeded out by the online thing. Yeah, I know. There's something about them, but you know, I used to go. Well, I'll always read books because I love the feel of them. The paper. When you've read a book like a ton of times, the paper's soft and it's amazing. But someone bought me a Kindle. I'm like, I'll never use it. I love books. And then, you know, you can cart 100 books around in your pocket kind of thing of your bag, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm sold. This is pretty good, you know. And, you know, you don't feel like something heavy, you can pull it out, and, you know, because you're kind of constrained by when you used to take a book around. You were reading that book whether you felt like it or not, kind of thing. So you'd get on the train going home and you're like, well, I don't really feel like reading Richard Dawkins, but, you know, it's the one I have, kind of thing, you know. So in you go. But you can sort of sit on the train and go, well, I'm going to read, I don't know, Dan Brown or something. I'm going to read something completely popcornish. No. So yeah, I think that it's just, people at bookstores, they have limited room and don't know the difference. So I don't know how you feel about that one, Michael, but it's a serious question. Wilberforce writes, could an AI have a eureka moment?
That's a good question. I would just have to go back to what I said earlier. We'd have to unpack exactly what a eureka moment is. I think we can ask more generally, and you could tell me this, Mark. Can AI can learn new information, correct?
Yes, correct.
But the feeling of the eureka moment is the more tangible aspect, but I'm not sure could be grasped. Like oh gosh, it's like it just all came to me. Like it's making so much. Like that seems very inherently like emotional to me. I don't know.
So, I mean, I've got some feelings about it. The whole idea of neuroplasticity and what I was talking about earlier, where the brain can explode in an unexpected direction, I'm not sure it can emulate that. It just doesn't have the ability to. However, the way that neural networks have been shown to work is they can do random things unpredictably, and as long as it meets what it's trying to achieve, it will strengthen those patterns to do it again. So it'll basically keep doing it. Could that be an eureka moment? Not really, because it's got to see some kind of tangible results to start with, whereas a eureka moment is sort of this completely off left field, has no, it's the disconnection from what you've been doing before. I wouldn't say never, but I'd say it would be incredibly difficult for something to emulate that spontaneous explosion of neural patterns that allows you to do something that has never been even considered or connected to anything in the first place. I think it would be, but who knows? The whole point, the reason why we call it an AI singularity is because nobody knows what will happen beyond it. There's an event horizon where we've got absolutely no idea what will happen. It's one of those technological things where we just can't predict it. So no idea is my answer. I'm sorry. I wish I had a better answer than that, but sometimes that's the best one.
Right.
And that was Wilberforce asking that. Dave H. Hello, Wilberforce. It's good to see you. Dave H. What would happen if an AI was taught the Bible?
Yeah. Who knows? If it was taught how to read the Bible. I mean, this gets back to like the ethical decision making question I was kind of asking about AI. Like maybe the more interesting question building off of that would be, what would AI do with it? What would AI do with that information?
Right. Or you could look at it another way. What if an AI was taught to believe the Bible?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question.
Right.
Would it implement all of the Old Testament punishments? And I mean, the cheeky atheist in me wants to say, well, it would immediately say, does not compute and break down. That's just being a cheeky atheist. If it was taught as the Bible is absolute truth. And it kind of reminds me, I don't know if you read Douglas Adams. He wrote about an electric monk which believed things for people so they didn't have to believe them themselves. Like, amazing author, Douglas Adams. But yeah, what would happen if an AI truly believed the Bible as, absolute truth? You would have a horrible world with sort of, Christian deathbots roaming around, stoning people for all kinds of transgressions and things. I truly believe that's the case. I don't think any implementation of the Old Testament as law, as it's described, would make a good society. I think that would be awful. Yeah.
Yeah, which gets back to the question of like empathy. I mean, even if I'm taking a I'll take a very generous interpretation of like Christian ethics. I
Right.
mean, you hear Christians all the time say, like, especially like with respect to what's considered to be like sinful, like this might be sinful, but we're all sinners type thing, which I think at best is an expression of empathy and of
Yeah.
relatability. Would an AI have that?
No.
Right.
I don't think there's a way to teach empathy. I don't think.
Right.
I mean, I would imagine it would be completely utilitarian, sort of. So
Yeah.
whatever its goal is, that is the thing that it's trying to achieve, which is sort of what makes it so scary.
And can AI understand things like parables that are more abstract?
Oh, there's a question. Yeah, that's a good question.
Like
Is it possible for them to? Probably. They'd need a whole load of contextual clues that sort of come from culture. They'd need a whole load of understanding of a whole load of different subjects to understand a parable. Not to say that you couldn't do it, but yeah, that's a good question.
Because it seems like on the surface level, it would just take like a hyper literalistic reading of the
Right.
Bible, and so you would get like the AI version of like Ken Ham or something like that.
Isn't Ken Ham an AI? He must be. That guy isn't real. Yeah, as an Australian, I'll apologise for Ken Ham.
Oh yeah, he is. Yeah,
he certainly is. Yeah, we shipped him out of here. Just no. Yeah, no, that's a very good question. Parables and
allegory and
right, and well, would it be necessarily worse because Christians can't agree on the meaning of parables to begin with? It's all up to interpretation. So you would have the most fervent biblical literalist that ever existed, right? Like real biblical literalist. Like I couldn't take it any other way than what it literally says. That's kind of scary, actually. Let's not have PreachBot 2000 out there, please. Yeah, no. Ray Comfort is New Zealand. Don't even go there. That's not us. That's not us. Not you. Take that back. You take that back. Anyway, it's been a real pleasure, Michael. I've had a great time. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time and your patience with me and the motley people we have hanging around. They're amazing, but I love them so much. They are miscreants and atheists and complete heretics.
I really appreciate you having me on, Mark. It was I really enjoyed talking to you. I'm hoping to return the favor for those of you watching.
Sure.
I'm hoping to get Mark on my channel too, maybe talk about evolution and some of the debates that you've had, and as well as Atheist Junior. Fingers crossed. But yeah, thank you for having me.
All we have to do is set up the time. I've already talked to him. We've already sort of said where we're in. Just have to set up the time, and that's all. So it's almost there. I just got to pin down AJ and get him to agree on a time. So if you send a few through, we should be fine to set it up. That will be no problem at all. No, I'd love to do that, especially if you're presenting the arguments and we're arguing against it. We've done a couple of sort of he's pretended to be where sort of someone like Hoven's coming from, and it's been really helpful to sort of hone those arguments against somebody that's actually giving you pushback, because it's easy to think of an argument in sort of in a vacuum, but it's a lot harder when someone's actually taking the essay. I suppose it's a bit like jiu-jitsu you described. You sort of put the argument, the counter, and then where are we then? What works then, kind of thing. So yeah, some parallels there I didn't think of.
For sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you, Mark.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and do have a fantastic day. I know it is day over there, and thank you so much for joining us. I will be back with some more interviews. Hopefully I can get a few more people on and have some awesome conversations. But for now, be kind to yourself and to each other.